The solicitor read my name from the deed the way he read everything, without pause, without drama, in the same tone he might use to confirm a postcode. Colette Hargrove, sole beneficiary. That was it. For years of my life, reduced to 2 words and a legal designation. And I sat there in that office, gray carpet, a dying plant in the corner, one window that looked out onto a car park, and I felt nothing I expected to feel. Not relief, not triumph, something quieter than either of those things. Something that doesn't have a clean name. I'd spent 4 years being the daughter who stayed. Not because anyone asked me to. That's the thing people never quite believe. No one sat me down and said, "Colette, you'll be the one who manages this." It was assumed. The way gravity is assumed. You don't discuss it. It just acts on you. And I had let it act on me for so long that I had stopped noticing the weight. I was holding a key in my coat pocket when he read my name. I've had the habit of carrying it since the week my mother was first diagnosed, for years prior, give or take. Brass. Worn smooth at the bow from decades of other people's hands before it became mine. My father's hands, mostly. He had a way of turning a key in a lock that I could still hear if I tried. A slight lift, a lean to the left, a specific half rotation that the old mechanism required. My sister had changed those locks. I'll tell you about that. But she hadn't found this key first. It was in the zippered inner pocket of my mother's winter coat, the green one, wool, with the missing button she kept meaning to replace. I was the one who sorted my mother's things. That's the only reason I had it. There was a moment, about 6 weeks into the estate proceedings, when I nearly handed it to Imogen. Slide it in an envelope, let her have the whole thing, let the whole mess belong to someone else. I didn't. And the reason I didn't is part of the story. If you're the woman in your family who showed up, who managed and drove and answered the phone and received nothing for it but the assumption that you would keep going, stay with me. This one ends with a document. And it was written before she ever touched those locks. Let me take you back. Not to the bad part. Not yet. To a Sunday afternoon when I was 12 years old and the kitchen smelled like lamb and rosemary and something I didn't have a word for yet. Safety, maybe, or the particular version of it that only exists when you're young enough to believe it will always be there. My father was teaching us his mother's stew. His mother had died before either of us was born, but the recipe existed in his hands. The way he held the wooden spoon, the angle he used to scrape the bottom of the enamel pot, and the specific moment he decided it was ready, which he couldn't explain and never tried to. My mother was at the kitchen table with a glass of red wine, laughing at something he'd said that I'd missed. Imogen was 16 and pretending to be bored and failing at it. My father put his hand briefly on my shoulder as he passed behind me, the way he did when he didn't need to say anything. I didn't know then that ordinary was the best it was going to get. I didn't know a lot of things at 12. Here's what I understood about my family growing up. That love in our house looked like usefulness. Not cruelty. I want to be precise about that. There was no cruelty. There was just a quiet, consistent set of expectations that nobody ever wrote down, and that I absorbed so completely I spent 20 years thinking they were my own personality. I need very little. Offer everything. Don't make a fuss. I was good at all 3. Better than Imogen, who needed things openly and without apology, who asked for things, expected them, was occasionally disappointed, and moved on. I found this baffling for most of my childhood and quietly envious of it for most of my adulthood. But I didn't learn to do it myself. I just got better at not needing things until the not needing became genuinely invisible, even to me. It was not a fair trade. I understand that now. At the time, I called it love. Small things first. Our father's car insurance needed renewing during a difficult month. He was post-surgery. Managing paperwork was beyond him. Imogen said she'd handle it. I waited 2 days, then drove to the office by myself and sat in a plastic chair for 45 minutes, sorting the whole thing. When I mentioned it to my father later, he smiled and said, "Your sister got that sorted. Did she? Good on her." I didn't correct him. That's on me. I know that. Medium things next. Their 45th anniversary. Imogen booked a restaurant. A good one, proper menu, nice card with all our names on it. I had spent 3 months tracking down a box of photographic slides my father had been convinced were lost in a house moved 20 years prior. I found them through a cousin, had them digitized at a place in town, selected the best 46, one for each year, and had them printed and bound. My mother cried when she opened it. Real tears, the kind that surprised her. That night at dinner, she turned to the table and said, "Imogen found the most wonderful restaurant, didn't she?" There's a hook on the wall by the kitchen door in my parents' house. There has always been a hook there. The brass key has hung on it for as long as I can remember. House key, back door, spare. It was there that night, catching the light the way it always did. I noticed it the way you notice something that has always been in your peripheral vision. Without thought, without weight. I didn't know yet what that key was going to mean. The large thing. When my mother was first diagnosed early-stage dementia, the GP was careful with the word early, as though that made it smaller. There was a family meeting. Imogen attended by phone. She had opinions about care facilities. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had researched things, which I later established she had not. And then she said it. Obviously, Colette will be the one managing the day-to-day. Not as an assumption, as a compliment. The tone you use when you're assigning someone a role they should feel honored by. Obviously. As though my entire life reorganizing itself around our parents' needs were as natural and inevitable as weather. No one corrected her. I didn't correct her. I picked up my pen and wrote down the name of the memory clinic. I used to tell myself the gap between Imogen and me was just how families work, temperament, birth order, and circumstance. I told myself it wasn't deliberate. I told myself that for a very long time. I stopped telling myself that the week they died. My father died on a Wednesday morning in late October. My mother died the following Friday. 8 days later, in the same hospital, in a different ward. The doctors said it was her heart. I think that's accurate, just not in the way they meant it. I registered both deaths. I called the funeral home. I sat in the same chair across from the same administrator and filled in the same forms with the same pen, 8 days apart. She recognized me the second time. She didn't say anything, just slid the paperwork across the desk with both hands, which I thought was kind. The will was straightforward, or it was supposed to be. When I contacted the solicitor's office to begin the estate process, the assistant mentioned, in passing, that an appointment had been made 3 months prior to amend certain documents. A routine update, she said. Nothing to concern myself with. I wrote it down. I didn't know why. I just wrote it down. The Monday after the second funeral, I drove to the house. I had a system. I'd been sorting incrementally for months before they died, during the worst of it, on Sunday afternoons when I could manage a few hours. I knew every drawer. I knew what was in the attic, and what was in the understairs cupboard, and which boxes in the spare room were my mother's, and which were decades of accumulated paperwork my father could never bring himself to discard. I knew, specifically, that there were 3 boxes of my mother's jewelry on the shelf in the master bedroom wardrobe. I had cataloged them myself, 6 months prior. Written descriptions. I took photographs on my phone in case it became relevant for the estate. The boxes were gone. I stood in the doorway of the wardrobe for a moment. Just stood there. The hallway behind me smelled faintly of cedar and white musk. Imogen's perfume, the same one she'd worn since university, the kind that announces a room before the person does. I told myself she must have come by, to pay her respects in her own way, to feel close to Mom. I told myself that twice. The second time, something in me went very quiet and didn't say anything back. 10 days after the funeral, I drove back. I parked in the street. I walked up the path, the same slight crack in the 3rd paving stone I'd been meaning to mention to my father for 2 years. I reached the front door. I took out the brass key. I put it in the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. The lift, the lean, and the particular half rotation the old mechanism needed. My father's trick. Nothing. The resistance was wrong. Different. The lock had been replaced recently from the feel of it. The brass around the keyhole was still bright, unscuffed. I stood on that doorstep for what I would later estimate was 4 minutes. I know because I looked at my phone when I finally moved, and I remember thinking the number seemed wrong. Too long, not long enough, I couldn't tell. I didn't knock. It didn't occur to me to knock on the door of my parents' house. I called Rue instead. She picked up on the second ring, listened to approximately 45 seconds of what I was saying, and told me to get back in the car. She drove 40 minutes to sit with me in the street. We didn't talk much. She brought 2 takeaway coffees and gave me one and didn't make me explain anything, which is the specific reason she is still in my life. Imogen called that evening. Her voice was careful, measured, the particular register of someone who has rehearsed being reasonable and almost pulled it off. I just thought it made sense for me to manage the property for now. You've already done so much, Colette. You deserve a rest. Rest. I turned the word over in my mind after I hung up. I'm still turning it over, if I'm honest. The precision of it, the particular cruelty of framing dispossession as a gift, as relief, as consideration, as something done for my benefit. As though 4 years of driving and managing and showing up had been so exhausting that the correct reward was to remove the one tangible thing those 4 years had been protecting. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the wall for a while. The next morning, I called the solicitor's office. The assistant told me the estate was in the process of being reviewed. I asked about the deed specifically, the family home, the property. There was a pause on the line. Longer than a pause should be when the answer is simple. She told me I would receive correspondence shortly. That night, I found the overnight bag I'd kept at my parents' house, packed, ready, the way I'd kept it for the last 18 months of caring for them. Toothbrush, change of clothes, and phone charger. The bag of a person who expected to be needed at short notice. I didn't need it anymore. I packed it properly, drove home, and put it in my own wardrobe. The brass key, the spare, the one for my mother's coat, I put in a small bowl by my front door. I didn't look at it when I set it down. I haven't been able to explain why exactly. I just couldn't. There was one thing I didn't know until much later. One detail about that appointment, the one 3 months before they died, the routine amendment I'd written down and not yet understood. I found out, eventually, what was said in that room. Who was there? What was decided? And when I did, it reframed everything I thought I understood about my parents' intentions. Not in the direction I expected. 41 days after my mother died, I was sitting at my kitchen table at 7:15 in the morning with a mug of tea I hadn't touched. It had been hot when I made it. It wasn't anymore. I hadn't slept properly. I hadn't eaten breakfast. There was food in the fridge. I'd been to the supermarket on Wednesday, methodically, list in hand, the way you perform normality when you're not sure what else to do with yourself. The food was there. I just hadn't wanted any of it. The solicitor's letter had been on the counter for 3 days. I'd moved it twice, off the worktop when I was cooking and back again afterward. I knew what it probably contained. I wasn't ready to know for certain. I had not cried in 11 days. I'd been counting, telling myself the number meant something, that the not crying was evidence of progress, of steadiness, of some internal architecture holding. It wasn't. I understand that now. What it actually was is harder to name. The specific condition that arrives when grief and injustice arrive together and cancel each other out, leaving something that isn't either one. Not sad. Not angry. Just present. Functional. Moving through rooms, making tea, going to work, coming home. The lights are on. Nobody particularly inside. One Friday morning, I woke up and the sadness had gone quiet. Not gone. Quiet. There's a difference, and it matters. And in the quiet there was something I hadn't had room for in 4 years. Space. Not peace. I want to be careful about that word. It implies more than I had. Just space. A small amount of interior room that had been occupied, for so long, by other people's needs and schedules and crises and comfort. And into that space, very slowly, like light under a door, came something that felt like clarity. I was sitting with it, not quite sure what to do with it, when I heard her. My downstairs neighbor, a woman in her 70s. I knew her only as the person whose post occasionally ended up in my box, who nodded at me in the entrance hall, whose name I did not know despite having lived above her for 4 years. She was singing in her kitchen, an old song. I couldn't place it, couldn't make out the words, just the melody rising through the floor with complete commitment and absolutely no technical ability whatsoever. She was singing badly, loudly, with what I can only describe as profound satisfaction. I sat very still and listened. I don't know why that was the thing. I've thought about it since, and I still can't give you a clean explanation. Something about a woman singing alone at full volume in her own kitchen on a Friday morning, simply because it pleased her. Not performing it, not doing it for anyone, just doing it because she wanted to, and wanting to was enough. I got up. I picked up the solicitor's letter. I opened it. It was not a loss.
It was an appointment request.
Neville Ashford's office, the following week. Matters pertaining to the estate of Hargrove. Please confirm your attendance at your earliest convenience. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the table and looked at the bowl by my front door. The brass key was in it. The spare. The one from my mother's coat. The one I'd put there and not been able to look at directly for weeks. I looked at it now. I want to tell you something I'm not particularly proud of. For a brief period, 2 weeks, maybe 3, I had genuinely considered putting that key in an envelope and sending it to Imogen. No note.
Just the key.
A gesture that meant, take it. Take all of it. I am too tired for this to continue. I had nearly done it. The thought that I'd nearly done it sat in my chest like a cold stone. I had spent 4 years being the daughter who gave everything and asked for nothing, and I had told myself that was love. But love doesn't quietly consent to its own erasure. What I had been doing was not love. It was the very sophisticated management of everyone else's comfort at the expense of my own standing. I had made myself so easy to overlook that I had practically handed someone the reason to overlook me. That ends here. Not with rage. I was far too tired for rage. It ended with a quiet, unambiguous decision to simply stop. I wrote back to Neville Ashford's office that afternoon. Confirmed the appointment. Sign my name at the bottom of the email the way I always sign things. First name, last name, no flourish. Colette Hargrove.
It looked different to me that day.
I'm not sure I can explain that either. It just did. 14 months. That's how long it took. Not for the grief. That doesn't work on a timeline, I've learned. But for everything else. The legal proceedings. The slow, meticulous machinery of Neville Ashford's office, which moved at exactly one speed regardless of anyone's urgency, and which turned out to be exactly the right speed for this particular situation. 14 months, and my life looked like this. A flat that was the same size but somehow more spacious. Not because I'd moved furniture, I hadn't. Because I'd stopped filling the spare corners with other people's requirements. There were plants on the windowsill that I'd kept alive. A print on the wall I'd chosen because I liked it, not because it was neutral enough for a guest. Coffee I actually wanted in the morning instead of whatever was cheapest and least likely to be commented on. Small things. Deliberately mine. 6 months after the funerals, I applied for a department lead position at work. I'd been eligible for 2 years. I hadn't applied because, and I'm reconstructing this honestly, I had so completely reorganized my life around being available for my parents that I had stopped being available for myself. When I got the role, my manager mentioned almost as an aside that I'd been passed over twice before. That I was, in his words, so reliable in my current position it was difficult to imagine the team without me. I thanked him. I didn't say anything else. I thought about it on the drive home, though. The specific irony of it. The way being indispensable in one place had made me invisible in another. The way I had been so busy being the person everyone could count on that I had forgotten to count myself. I didn't need to explain that irony to anyone. I just noted it, filed it, and kept going. I had stopped attending family gatherings where Imogen might be present. Not dramatically, no announcement, no explanation. I simply stopped appearing. If anyone noticed the pattern, they didn't mention it to me directly. That told me something too. Imogen had called 3 times in the past month. It was not about the estate, that had moved well beyond the reach of phone calls. About the garden mostly. About a specific lamp she remembered from the sitting room.
Her tone had changed.
The managed reasonableness was still there, but underneath it, at the edges, something that sounded, if I'm being fair, like genuine distress. I listened to the 3rd voicemail twice. There was a moment, brief, real, where I thought about calling back. Not to change anything, not to concede or negotiate or soften the outcome. Just to explain. To offer something that at least had the shape of grace. I put the phone face down on the counter. I made dinner, properly a whole meal, the kind that takes 40 minutes and dirties 3 pans. I ate it at my own table. I didn't call back. I'm not cruel. I want to be clear about that because I've spent time being clear about it to myself. There is a difference between cruelty and simply no longer managing someone else's experience of the consequences of their own choices. I know the difference. I'm still learning some days which side of that line I'm standing on. Neville Ashford's office called on a Wednesday afternoon. They were ready to proceed. Would I be available to attend the property on Friday morning with the executed documentation? I would need to be present when the current occupant was informed. I asked if my sister would be there. A pause. They are considered kind. The current occupant will be informed at the time of the appointment, as is standard procedure in these matters. I wrote down the time, 9:15. Friday. I put the phone down and reached, out of pure muscle memory, for the brass key in the bowl by my door. I had it in my coat pocket before I remembered. I wouldn't need it anymore. The door would open for me with or without it. Neville Ashford collected me from the street outside the house at 9:14 on Friday morning. He had a leather briefcase, the old kind, with brass clasps slightly worn at the corners. He shook my hand. He did not ask how I was feeling, which I appreciated more than I could have explained. We walked up the path together, past the crack in the 3rd paving stone, and he knocked on the door of my parents' house with the particular authority of someone who already knows what's inside. Imogen answered. She was dressed. That was the first thing I registered. Properly dressed, hair done, the kind of composed presentation that takes effort and is meant to signal control. She looked at me, then at Neville, then back at me. She stepped aside. The kitchen was the same and entirely different. Her coffee cup was on the counter. Her jacket hung on the hook by the door. Not the hook where the brass key used to live, the other one, the one my father had put up for a calendar that had been gone for 15 years. There was a ceramic bowl on the windowsill with a set of keys in it. New keys. Bright, unscuffed. None of them are the original brass one. She had been living here. That was clear. The specific accumulation of someone's daily life was everywhere. A magazine on the table, a phone charger coiled by the socket, a cardigan over the back of the chair my mother had always used. Neville set his briefcase on the kitchen table. My mother's kitchen table. He opened it with both clasps at once, a small, practiced motion, and removed a document. He placed it on the table. Her name was at the top. Then, further down, another name.
Mine.
Colette Hargrove. Sole beneficiary. In my father's careful block capitals, in the witness notation beside both signatures. His handwriting, the same handwriting that had written my name on birthday cards and school permission slips and the label of a jar of jam he'd made one autumn and been inexplicably proud of. The same hand. Neville began to read. I need to tell you something I didn't know until that morning. The appointment, the one 3 months before they died, the routine amendment I'd written down and not understood. Imogen had been there. Not my parents alone with their solicitor. Imogen, who had told the family she knew nothing about any changes to the estate documents. Who had driven 40 minutes to attend a meeting she later denied knowledge of. Neville mentioned it quietly, as a matter of record. A file note. Her name, the date, and the duration of the meeting. What Imogen had not known was that my parents had made a second appointment, a separate one, scheduled without her, in which the amendment was drawn and signed. They had let her come to the first meeting. They had made their decision in the second. They had known what she was doing. They had watched her redirect conversations and move things and manage perceptions and position herself, and they had not said a word to either of us. They had simply sat down with Neville Ashford and written a document in the only language that couldn't be renegotiated afterward. I stood in my mother's kitchen and felt something I did not expect to feel. Not vindication. Something heavier than that. The particular grief of realizing your parents saw more clearly than you knew and chose silence over intervention and left the correcting to the paperwork. I don't know entirely what to do with that. I'm still working it out. Imogen looked at the document for a long time. Then she looked at me. They wouldn't have wanted this to happen this way. I kept my voice level. They made sure it happened this way. That's rather the point of a deed. I looked after this house. I've been here every day since. Since you changed the locks, I said it quietly. I know. I watched the key stop working. She set her coffee cup down on the counter.
Carefully.
The kind of care that isn't really about the cup. A silence. I was trying to protect the family. I looked at my sister across my mother's kitchen. Across the table where our father had taught us to make stew. Across 42 years of being in the same family and understanding it, I now knew it entirely differently. Imogen, you were the thing the family needed protecting from. Mom and Dad knew that. They just said it in the only language that couldn't be talked around. She didn't cry.
She didn't shout.
Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her eyes moved back to the document, to the date, specifically.
You wasn't här underständigt.
The first meeting and the second meeting. What she'd been present for and what had happened without her. The expression that crossed her face was not shame, and it was not rage. It was recognition. That, I think, is the thing she will carry longest. Not losing the house. Knowing that her parents saw her, fully, clearly, without illusion, and recorded what they saw in a legal document, and said nothing to her face. Recognition is worse than punishment. You can argue with punishment. You cannot argue with being known. Neville Ashford took 20 minutes to complete the standard procedure. He was efficient and not unkind. I didn't watch. I walked through the house instead. I touched the doorframe of my parents' room, just the wood, just for a moment. I went to the back door and looked at the hook where the original brass key had always hung. It was empty. Of course it was. The key was in my coat pocket. It had been there since Friday morning, out of the same muscle memory I'd been carrying for 4 years. I took it out and looked at it, worn smooth at the bow, bright where hands had held it, dull where they hadn't. My father's hands. My mother's hands.
Mine. I didn't put it in the lock.
I didn't need to prove anything to the door. I just held it for a moment in my parents' kitchen, in the house that the document said was mine, and let it mean what it meant. 3 weeks after the handover, on a Saturday morning, I made tea in my mother's kitchen. I didn't particularly need tea. I just needed somewhere to stand. I stood where my father used to stand, the spot in front of the hob, slightly left of center, where the floorboard has a particular give underfoot that I've known since I was 12 years old. The house was quiet around me. Not the quiet of absence, exactly. More than the quiet of a house that is waiting, that hasn't yet been told what it is going to be next, and is patient about it. I'm patient about it too.
For now.
The brass key sits in a small bowl by the kitchen door. Not on the hook. The hook is still there, but I found a bowl I liked in one of the unpacked boxes, blue ceramic, my mother's, and I put on the shelf below the hook instead. The key is in it. The original one. Worn smooth at the bow from decades of other hands before mine. It used to mean arrival. It used to mean belonging to something I was never quite sure I belonged to. Now it means I stayed when staying cost me something and the record showed it. That's all. It's enough. I don't have a sister, in any living sense of the word. I have someone who shares my parents and my childhood and nothing else, who exists now at the edge of the story I'm trying to write for myself. I didn't choose that.
She did.
But I am the one who feels the space where she used to be. I suspect I always will. My parents left me a house. What I've been turning over these past weeks is whether they also left me an apology.
I think they might have.
I think a deed might be the most formal apology two people who are not good at saying things out loud could ever give their quiet daughter. I don't know if it's enough, but on a Saturday morning in their kitchen, making tea I don't need, it is very nearly the right shape of a thing. If you're the one in your family who stayed, who managed the appointments and the paperwork and the phone calls at 2 a.m, and who has been trying to understand why none of it seems to have been noticed, I see you. The record is being written, even when it feels like no one is keeping it. I'll be here.